Hello and welcome to Mike's Garage. And as per the usual, if you're enjoying our videos, by all means, please subscribe. And when you do, be sure and tap the little the bell, the notification bell, so that you'll be notified every time we put a new video on. Anyway, let's get going on this thing. You know, I have played with this wheel and played with this wheel, and what I'm trying to do is see that everyone gets all the information that I keep getting asked for. One of the things I got asked for was setting the end play on the bearings and packing the bearings with grease and all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, this is a new wheel. This is really the one to do it on to explain it. Now, when I bought this hub, the hub came with directions. And the directions clearly said, by all means, check the end play and pack the bearings with grease. So when I did this thing, in order to get it on the truing stand, I had to take the seals out anyway. So here this thing is. This is the perfect time to do it. So what we're going to do first is we're going to check the end play. Notice this is a tapered bearing. Timken is actually a brand, but all of these tapered bearings, they're normally referred to as Timken bearings. But here it is. This is one of them. I'm going to put it on the axle. What I did is I put an axle in the vise. This is the way I set these things up. I mean, there are all sorts of tools and things, but what you're really doing is checking the end play of the bearings. So we're putting it into a real condition. This is just the way it would be on the motorcycle. That is a motorcycle axle. It's a Springer axle. Now the bearing race for this bearing is already pressed into the hub. If we were putting a new one in, that would be different. Okay, now maybe, nah, we're not going to do that. The spacer that's in there can be removed easy enough. I'm going to remove it. It's removed. So now we will put it on the axle. Okay, now there's a bearing in the other side. So we'll put this on the axle. And there it is. Now I don't have this axle on a front end. All I have here is an axle and a wheel. I have the spacer between the two bearings. So what I did is I dug up a bunch of spacers, is what I normally do, so I can set the preload on the bearing. What we're doing is we're putting a load against the inner race of that bearing. When you load it from both sides, then the bearings are floating on the axle, or on the wheel, actually. How can I demonstrate that? Right now it's not tightened down. What we're doing here is by putting these spacers and this nut and this washer here, we're duplicating what it's like for this wheel to be installed on the motorcycle. So I have a torque wrench here. We normally torque that axle nut to about 55 pounds. And I've set this torque wrench to 55 pounds. So we'll just torque it down. Now the spacer in there holds the bearings apart from each other. And then we're tightening down against those bearings. So what we're basically doing is setting the end play of that hub. Now that hub can go up and down here. Or of course, if it were vertical, it would be going back and forth. So you look up in your service manual, and the service manual says, from 1/2 thousandths, that's 5/10 of a thousandth, to 14 thousandths end play is what they want it set at. So, if you do enough of them, which I've done enough of them, you can say, that one's fine. But if you're not sure, what I do is I set up a dial indicator like this. I've got it already stuck down to the bench, and I will get this gauge tightened right up against that rim, and when I lift the rim, I get my reading. I'm not going to figure out exactly what that says, but believe me, it's a lot less than 14th and a whole lot more than 0.5 Good enough. So I know that it's proper. We're safe. We're not going to seize any bearings onto the axle or onto the inner hub. Now that we've done that, the only thing left is to pack the wheel bearings with grease and put the seals back in them. Excuse me? Oh, I just got asked a real good question from Mike the cameraman. He said, and what are you going to do if it doesn't do that? Well, that's true. You either need a longer spacer or a shorter spacer. Now, if you put a longer spacer in there, it could easily be too long. But what you can do is buy shims. So you add a couple shims and move those bearings just a little further apart, and when you tighten them down, you're going for that same measurement. This is what I'm talking about, me forgetting to say things. If it's acceptable, great. If it's not acceptable, we're going to have to fix it. So what we'll need to do is add shims to the end of that spacer to get that end play that we need in there. I'm sure glad you're here and you asked me. Anyway, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pack the wheel bearings with grease. If I can do that without knocking the whole mess over here that's in my vise. Now, most guys that pack wheel bearings, this is the way I was taught, is you get that bearing in your hand with a handful of grease, and you grease the bearing. That's the way everybody used to do it. Well, when I was a kid, my dad found a beautiful bearing packer. It was an antique, and it had a big lever on it, and he had it on the workbench in his shop, and it was really nice. He would pack a bearing on it. Anyway, modern days came by, and I got myself a bearing packer, and it never had a big handle on it. So one day I realized my arbor press was sitting there and I could use the arbor press as a handle. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by packing one bearing and then the next. Let's put that spacer right back in the wheel. And I really do like that the manufacturer says, be sure and check the end play, which I always do on a wheel when I buy it. Whether I'm buying one or building one, all that stuff needs to be checked. Don't depend on someone else. Unless you have a mechanic that you really trust. Okay, so we're going to take this bearing. And I'm going to take my little bearing packer. This is a bearing packer. I felt so important when I actually bought one. Now, a lot of guys just throw a rag over the top of it and stand on this thing, and that'll pack your bearings. But I happen to have this old arbor press, and I just love it. Okay. Can you get down there with it? Can you see that in the camera? And watch the grease come out of that bearing. Now that's another thing. So when you have a bearing packer, the beauty of that is when you want to repack a bearing with grease, as you pump new grease into that bearing, it's forcing the old grease out. And that's a wonderful thing. Washing a bearing does not work very well. So now I'm going to put this bearing right back into the hub where I want it. And I'm going to take this rag here and stick it in the other side of the hub. Set it down. And take one of these seals I have here. Here's one. And my seal installer. Get this started a little bit with a mallet. Yes, it is my beat up old rawhide mallet. Okay, that takes care of one side. And now we'll do the other side. And again, yes, this makes me happy. I have a beautiful new wheel for my motorcycle, and I want everything else to be as nice as that wheel. Okay. And if it seems like I'm having fun, it's only because I am. Yeah, I have one more seal. Wherever I put it, there it is. Okay. And here's the spacer that goes in here. Get a little bit of grease on that seal so that it all fits really nice. And then we have this dust cover. Oops, I forgot to put snap rings back in. The later model ones don't use any snap rings. So let's see here about putting that snap ring in there. It's busted myself. Too much grease on the handles. I don't know if I can do this. There it is. Okay. Now we'll do the one on the other side. Forgot there was a groove in there and a snap ring to hold that seal. And there's that one. Now we'll turn it back over. And here is the dust cover that goes on here. And now we have a nice, proper looking star hub wheel. And I got the combination of all of my favorite things there. I got a star hub with modern bearings, polished stainless steel spokes, and a polished Barani aluminum rim. So, that makes me real happy. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I hope that was enough information now so that everyone knows how to do this. At any rate, I'm happy, hope you are. And I'll see you out on the road.